with age comes wisdom. So hopefully my years in advance of you will at least allow me to share some interesting thoughts tonight. I don't know about you, David or Gwen, who gave talk last week, but when you see all these faces appearing on the screen, it feels a little bit like being in a court with the jury members appearing in front of you. So let me say at the outset that there are three elements of what I'm sharing tonight. Sorry about my voice, incidentally. It is a voice condition that those who know me know that I live with, so hopefully it won't be too distracting for you. But there are three elements that my mum would not enjoy about this evening's presentation, were she alive, God bless her. First of all, I did mean to make a welcome as well to those who've responded to my invitation to be here this evening. All of whom, bar one, I think, have worked with, known in some way, Bishop Brian Noble, and one of the abiding things I remember him saying was about us having three vocations as human beings. The first, to be human. The second, if we are baptized, is a second vocation. But the third is a vocational one of any sort of vocation, whatever our calling in life. And it's the first one that has priority over all. And that's in a way the background from which I'm approaching this subject tonight. I hope, and as I say, my mum would have disapproved of the fact there'll be elements which seem to question some of current practice in the church. The second one was, if the video clip works okay, there'll be a tiny bit of nudity. I warn you about that ahead of time. And she wouldn't have liked that. But the one that would have most offended my mother is the fact that I will be using some contemporary art as well. And that's really one of the reasons I accepted Mark's invitation, because I know he detests contemporary art. So this is really an opportunity to just make him sit for 40 minutes or so and enjoy hopefully what I have to share. So let me go to share screen. I don't know how to get myself on the play from start. Can you see me? Some of you. Oh, good. Right. So if you're asking where I was or thinking, well, here I am in Soho, or at least Soho as it might have appeared in the 17th, 18th centuries. Okay. A very genteel place, people with money, and but then still having animals driven along the streets. When I mention Soho, I wonder, is this what crossed your mind? Soho as it is today. For some, a place of refuge where they find acceptance, with the exception of attacks like the pub bombing some years ago. But for others, it has to be acknowledged, a place they are exploited, vilified, and abused. Soho is a kind of microcosm, then a place which issues and dramas that lurk beneath the surface of any society are lived out in a more open and concentrated manner. Soho, a place to encounter real-life victims and survivors, abusers and abused, liberated outsiders, and modern-day slaves. So tonight, this is a rather highfalutin title. The postmodern bit has just had to find something to go along with guilt and shame. It's just trying to look at these issues in our contemporary world today. And as Mark's already said, doing so with some illustrations from the world of art. Now, one of the arts, of course, is this one. And if I knew how to do the thing, I'd have pasted myself on here with these two guys and have shifted my torso across to join them. But this is a song from the 80s, of course, which has regained use in the recently produced television program of the name It's a Sin. And this song came out of the same kind of context, you might say, as we've been discussing in contemporary what we'll be discussing tonight. This is context of Neil Tennant, openly gay man, searching for love against a backdrop of government hostility, if you remember back to those days, police harassment, press taunting, and the horror of AIDS. So that's the sort of background I'm addressing tonight as well. And here, well, that's a picture of a girls' grammar school. And I think it's in Australia where the piece we're about to listen to was written up and appeared in last week's Guardian. And that will sort of give my perspective away to you if you could read the sides there. So this was an article in the Guardian, and Larry has very kindly agreed to read it for us. It's a fairly lengthy extract, but I think you'll find it, or hopefully find it helpful. And there we go. Larry, if I could ask you to unmute.
Thank you. I was first introduced to the concept of consent with the story of Saint Maria Goretti. In 5th grade, a teacher told us about an 11-year-old Italian girl whose male neighbour attempted to rape her. It wasn't made clear what the word rape meant, only that it was obviously sinful for everyone involved. The virtuous child begged her would-be rapist to kill her instead, so that she would remain pure and go straight to heaven instead of hell, the teacher said. He stabbed her to death, and now Saint Maria has the dubious honour of being the church's youngest virgin martyr. At high school, sex education consisted entirely of bullying us into being terrified of losing our virginity. We were lectured on how the pill would give us cancer and told that the only proven form of contraception was abstinence. Just say no. If our no was ignored, it meant we weren't saying it clearly enough. In the absence of actual contact with boys, we learned plenty about them through a baffling array of euphemisms. Men were like dogs, and if you put the food in front of them, they had to eat it. They were wild stallions, and women bravely held the reins, etc. It was up to women, always women, to keep their foot firmly on the brakes. After all, men's brains were smaller than women's, so they couldn't be held responsible. That's why they always did stupid things without thinking, like going abseiling with no harnesses and sexually assaulting teenage girls. Although we didn't know any men, we were already burdened with the task of controlling their thoughts and actions. We didn't learn about alcohol and consent because we didn't learn about consent at all. I never heard the word uttered once in 13 years, and I'm sure the boys at our brother's school didn't either. As has become clear from one recently reported case, girls are still learning they are to blame for their sexual assaults. I wonder how many others don't even realise that what happened to them wasn't a sin or a poor choice. And without proper consent, education for both boys and girls, I fear for another generation of young women who will have to live with shame their entire lives.
Thank you, Larry, very much. There's a certain irony I realise about a man giving a talk in which there's going to be probably more reference to women, certainly when it comes to the artists, women artists. So I was very grateful that Larry agreed to bring a feminine voice to our presentation this evening. And this is a woman who experienced education back in the let's say 50s or 60s, or even going into the 70s, like I did, and but still finding echo today. Similar problems and difficulties, and where the weight of expectation in terms of moral rectitude unfairly falls on women, and that's, I think, what she was expressing quite rightly there. And she was writing from an Australian context, as it happens, and this quote I've put up on for you to read now is also written from an Australian context. It's 20 years ago now, but I think it remains true today for many of us, which is why I thought I would invite you to take a look at some images. Just quick, we'll go through these fairly quickly. And these images are presented to provoke, in the proper sense of the term, or original sense of provocare, to bring forward a response from you, not to provoke you to anger or upset, hopefully, but just looking at these images I'm going to present, and if I'm able to do it, one will be a short video. I don't really want to explain why I've included them, because I'm hoping they will just sort of evoke in your own eyes and hearts thoughts about your own experience and your own attitude to the sacrament, but obviously beginning with this this one. So we'll move through them. I'll just leave them briefly on the screen for this one. Probably does require a little bit of explanation, perhaps not from the people in Canada, because there was a custom in New England anyway, brought over from Europe, of beekeepers. If anything troubled them, particularly a bereavement in the family, they'd have to go and tell the bees. That's what this is. And John Greenleaf Whittier, who wrote the Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, or of us all, as I prefer to say it, or sing it, wrote a poem on this same theme. So there's the warning. And again, it's only tiny little glimpses of something if it works.
To be a real form of art before I die.
Marina Abramovich, the artist is present, means she will be present.
Marina, are you nervous about the show at the moment?
Incredibly.
And when you sit in the chair, what are you looking at?
Anybody who's sitting in front of me, it's just the gaze.
Seven and a half hours, 6 days a week, motionless. Wow.
It's a matter of time before firing someone in the face is gonna be art.
This is about limit, even for me.
I don't know whether any of you are aware of that the performance art that was, I think, probably about 10 years ago now. Marina Abramovich, she spent 3 months each day in the gallery, Museum of Modern Art in New York, as you saw her there all day, with different people coming and just sitting opposite her, and there were all sorts of different responses, as you might imagine. Some of them attention grabbing, but most, I think, seemed to be quite profound. And I was just fascinated by the fact that some people can just look at one another in that kind of context, and all kinds of stuff that seemed to emerge. So we come on to the sort of core, in that sense, of sharing this evening, the guilt and shame, of course. Of course, I'm never quite clear what it was that even Adam experienced in the Garden of Paradise, Garden of Eden. Was it shame or guilt? I think some theologians would make it very clear it was shame caused by guilt, I suppose. But this is our image of or it's a nice image, that one actually, from a carved pillar in Montgomery. But I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. So this is just an image to sort of help to introduce looking at both of these two concepts of guilt and shame, which brings us on to the etymology, I think, which is always instructive. The Welsh poet and artist David Jones reminds us that everyone means different things by the same words. So as I address these words this evening, I recognize I might not be doing it in a way that a dictionary definition would agree with, or theologians or the like, or psychologists. But if you look at the origins of the words, the three of them are old English words, and one, the Kinroddi one there, I think is an old Norse word. But guilt carries the same meaning as sin, a moral defect or a failure of duty. Gildan is about the price you pay, in a sense, the discharge of a debt, and they're thought to be the two words behind guilt. But a debt incurred that hopefully can be repaid. And then with shame, cheek redness, Kinroddi, the Roddy I suppose is ruddy. I mean, it's that word, isn't it? You know, so we go a bit pink in the face if we're embarrassed about something or ashamed or caught out. So it also relates to scamu, which is disgrace, dishonor, and loss of esteem. So bearing those two in mind, I want to look at them more specifically in this way. So guilt, to my understanding, and with the way I'm framing it tonight, is an awareness in ourselves or by others about us that we bear the responsibility for a wrongdoing or some wrongdoing. So guilt is a real thing. Guilt operates very much in the public and the personal spheres as a crime, obviously guilty of a crime. I don't know why I'm pointing at the picture. You can't see me pointing at the picture, but I am pointing at the picture of the court scene. So crime, sin, a misdemeanor, or a definite breaking of rules, you know, not keeping the distance, not wearing the mask at the moment. People might weigh that as guilty actions. And guilt, in most contexts, guilt usually allows a route to redemption, be it secular redemption or spiritual redemption. Guilt is something we once we acknowledge, and so long as we are actually guilty of that of which we stand accused or feel responsible, there is a route to redemption. Our failings can be acknowledged and dealt with through courts or tribunals, acts of restitution, as in restorative justice, if we're so inclined, through confession, reconciliation. And so guilt is linked, in my understanding, with the norms of morality and law properly understood. There's a greater sense of objectivity. But if I'm guilty, it's because I know I've committed something that, in a sense, offends against the norms by which I'm trying to live my life, and I can do something about it, some form of restitution. Whereas shame, remember the ruddiness. Here's a picture with, you can see the ruddiness in the face of this young woman. be talking about this a little later on, but I just use it to illustrate that shame, and the way I'm trying to suggest tonight, is linked more with taboos, with mixed up social attitudes and opinions and attitudes for which it's much more difficult to provide a rationally satisfying or convincing explanation. But these taboos do any respect to justice or personal freedom, individuality and equality. And this, I'm talking much more, shame often is around issues associated with sex and sexuality and gender. It's about taboos and about socially constructed attitudes. Shame, for me, is the pointing of the finger of accusation, as the accusers did of the woman presented to Jesus as having committed adultery. And the person with the finger pointing at them, the person accused of something shameful, that person is given no easy route to redemption. What the person who is being shamed is subject to continuously is stigmatization, being shunned, being okay to ridicule them, indeed abuse them, and either push them into ghettos or cause a situation where people only feel safe in a community of like folk. This is the sort of stuff that shame produces. Shame leads to ghetto, to exile, and as we know, for the thousands of people who are mutilated, abused and murdered by people who claim to be acting with authority or justly. So that's my difference between guilt and shame. Again, you don't have to agree with it, but that's where I'm coming from. I do say, and I think shame, the answer to shame, rather than being a route that society endorses or the church, the best response to shame is to seek community with those who understand the situation, the struggles that you're contending with in life. And that's why I always sense to know that Jesus is constantly offering community to people who have been shamed. Which brings me on to, Mark will be okay about this bit, because it's art from the 17th century, and this is a fantastic artist, Artemisia Gentileschi, and this picture allegory of painting, she was adopting what was quite usual at the time, sort of allegorizing human activities. And one of them would be painting. And you can see this beautiful, engaged woman with her naturalistic dark hair. And it's widely regarded as being a self-portrait that was, interesting enough, painted during her short sojourn here in England at the age of 45. She depicts herself as a dynamic, you might say forceful character, armed with a brush, not a little bit unlike the way Seamus Heaney, looking at his father digging in the ground outside, understands the pen that he wields as a poet being the tool with which he creates something. Here's this artist defining herself not in terms of gender, but in terms of the creativity that she's able to express with such great gift. So centuries before the term feminism was coined, she's using her own means to communicate that expectation, that determination in her own life. But her achievements as an artist came at a price. She was raped by her mentor as an artist, yet she stood her ground and pursued her assailant in court. And during the trial, it was Artemisia who was cross-examined most thoroughly. It was her honesty that was put most strongly to the test, because she actually had a tourniquet wrapped around her thumb and tightened as they asked her to, I'm doing it again, tightened to ask her, was she telling the truth? At which point she looked across at her assailant and said, any honourable, this is my wedding ring, any honourable gentleman of the era would have presented a woman who truly loved or was wooing with a ring. So this is the ring I get through your actions, was what she said to him. She was, however, vindicated by the court, not that the accused suffered any great consequences, but at least her reputation was vindicated in court. So it's not surprising that then to look at some more of her productions. This one is the one I showed before, and I've still got it up there with shake, because you've got here Susanna and the elders, you know, the biblical story about the two lusting and lecherous men who then accused her of being the one who was engaged in misdeeds. And so you could actually see in her the water in her eyes. It's a most moving depiction, I think, of somebody being shamed violently. So, and I use words and accusations of violence, let's be honest. I mean, this is a woman being subjected to shame in my eyes, and anybody who's experienced shame would, and knowing it as an attack, not as an offence and a fault on our part. Let me be clear on this. That's the way I'm using shame tonight. Is this? It's what other people put upon us, not what we accrue to ourselves. So that's an image of that. But then there's the other side of it. Here again, this is another biblical incident. Judith beheading Holofernes. He's the one who laid siege to the Israelite town, and he'd also tried to lay siege to Judith. And when he summoned her to his where he was living and sleeping camped outside, somehow or other he was able to summon her there. She took the opportunity when he got drunk and fell into a drunken stupor to sever his throat and head, and put a stop then to the siege to the town, as well as defend her honour. And you can see these women conducting their act of vindication, and you can call it that, with gusto. And again, it's thought that the woman in blue with the knife was a self-image of Artemisia Gentilis, and this was painted just a year or so after the rape, as it happens. Okay, so this was using art as a means of answering back, of in a way a form of healing and catharsis, I suppose. Never adequate to the crime, but here it is. We're observing this woman's beautiful art years after her assailant is largely forgotten, or is only a footnote to her story. Which brings us up to now. Shame is a phenomenon that constantly reinvents itself. Western societies may think they have left the prudishness of religion and Victorian double standards behind. But like the virus that is currently stalking the planet, shame is a shape-shifting phenomenon, ducking and diving, And as always, its victims are predominantly women, and any person of any gender who declines to conform to the expectations of those who would force, ridicule, control, and use lies to manipulate and demean others for their own ends, their own sad purposes. In which, sad to say, is true today as it was before, something in which many pose as religious leaders, guardians of tradition, or red-blooded males, imposing their will on others, imposing their standards and expectations for their own benefit. And this results, as we know, even in our own times, in increasing amounts of body dysmorphia, eating disorders, self-harming, euphemistically described cosmetic surgery, genital mutilation, deliberately chosen to just conform to stereotypes seen in images in magazines and online and the like. And of course, anyone who expresses solidarity in the presence of contemporary shamers, they're shamed too. If you speak up about these things, you're now described as being woke. Be very wary of that accusation. In my hearing, it carries the same sort of weight as the shaming of previous generations. There might be subtle and important questions of justice behind it, but in many instances it's being used to shame and to silence genuine issues, which people such as Tracy Emin have had the measure of such people since their youngest days. Like her sister Artemisia, Tracy has exposed the hypocrisy of those who would label women in demeaning terms at the same time as they excuse and even lionize their own behavior. It takes two to tango, as it were, which is why Tracy produced this piece of art, and also the one of the tent where she wrote the names of men whom she'd engaged in sex with. So she's I have enormous respect for her art too. Now I'm going to skip. I was going to give a section on the healing of the man born blind, but I'm looking at the time, and that's an interesting thing. But I just want to really bring us to a conclusion. That's well, as you saw earlier on, the chap opposite her, I can't remember his name. He was the artist with whom she lived for several years, toured the continent of Europe in a van with. They did a lot of performance art together, had a very close bond. Something went wrong, and he ended up suing her for an amount, but they kind of reconciled. I think before this photograph was taken, but he surprised her by turning up on one of these occasions. And whereas for all of the others, she'd just sat opposite, almost stoically, but still engaged eye to eye. Again, on this occasion, the tears were in her eyes. And then she reached over to as a sign, I guess, of reconciliation, a mutual love. I think both would have accepted. He died recently, I believe, but both would accept that they did love each other. So if I could conclude like this. As a young man, I found myself in the very happy position of being befriended by a triumvirate of women teachers. They're all considerably older than me, actually. I mean, they were younger than I am now. I was in my early 20s, but these three very good friends, all teachers. And we met in a prayer group, and they took me under their wing. We had terrific times attending prayer groups. They're going to the houses of either any of them afterwards for a bite to eat and a chat way into the night. We had retreats together and we had day trips and the like. And it was very formative to me because I was part, or I was almost like a witness to them discussing life, relationships, heartbreak, and loss. As it happens, all had married men who had let them down in different ways, and in different ways they had borne the brunt of poor. It wouldn't always be abusive in the strictest term of the sense behaviour. Don't get me wrong, but they had to bear the brunt of the poor behaviour of their partners, while continuing to provide levels of support in the home for their children, reassuring and nurturing them. But the way they spoke and supported one another had me thinking at a very green age that celibate male clergy were hardly likely to be the best ministers of God's grace and forgiveness and healing in such contexts. And in a way, a lot of what these women were dealing with was less to do with guilt, more to do with shame, although one of them was told by some people who were supposedly giving her good advice that the answer to her husband's lack of involvement would be to her to make sure she always dressed in an alluring fashion and made sure she had her makeup on when he arrived home from work, and that was her response. And this came from a Catholic community. I won't name them anyway. But the way they spoke, and again, I must say there was a lot of laughter, by the way, a lot of laughter. Again, cathartic, I think, but I was just thrilled to be party to and privileged to sort of, I mean, they weren't looking to me for advice, thank goodness, because I couldn't have given them a jot of advice, but they were giving me a tremendous insight. And then 40 years later, I found myself reading some of the works of a Catalan Republican who was also a trained medical doctor, who also happens to be a Benedictine sister. This woman, Teresa Forcadell, has another advantage over me in that she, and I mean this in context, you know, she wasn't raised in a practicing Catholic family. And in that sense, she has been able to survey the church, first of all, from the outside, as well as having chosen to join us from the inside. So she's been undeterred, nonetheless, from speaking the truth as she sees it. But not only as she sees it, but as she researches it. This isn't just a woman with an opinion. This is a woman who has researched these issues. And in her research, she's discovered that at the Third Lateran Council in 1179, it issued a decree that banned abbesses from presiding over the formal forgiveness of the members of their community. We're talking here reconciliation. And clearly the issue is of such magnitude that at the succeeding Lateran Council 75 years later, the issue had to be revisited somewhat, insisting that all women religious should at least once a year present themselves for confession in front of a priest, a man. Teresa's research has also uncovered a woman called Gertrude of Helfta, a member of a 13th century circle of like-minded women who discussed and wrote theological and spiritual texts. They were like a living seminar. They did for religious communities, but they began more as a seminar of exploration. Gertrude, Saint Gertrude as she is now, and patron of the novices in the Benedictine order, she considered herself, and this was accepted by the others in the community and indeed the local community, she considered that she had received a divine mandate to counsel and forgive the mainly women who came to her in any kind of need. So, guilt is something we know we're responsible, is about something we're responsible for. There's a route of vindication which is sort of authorized both in the secular world and in the religious world. Shame is something which the leaders of both those sectors can impose upon us, and people with unfair levels of power can impose and try and manipulate and control lives with shame. They're very different, and shame, as I think, is something which causes into communities of support, healing, fellowship, self or communal forgiveness. But the good thing about art, of course, the good thing about art is that it challenges preconceptions. Another good thing about art is it asks questions. It doesn't answer. I'm not trying to give answers tonight, I hope, or presume to give answers. The other thing about art is it inspires creative engagement and response. And that is my sense of what the church and the world more widely needs in the face of all shaming is a way of undermining it by using our gifts, our talents, our insights, and our sense of community to support one another. And yeah, there we have it. Over to you.